So let's talk about the OODA loop. Okay. Those of you who know me well will know me that I bang on about it every so often. Okay. I appreciate that lots of people don't find it terribly exciting, but the reality is, it is what helps make better decisions, and it has helped me enormously, both in the military and in business and in life and in sports and also in trading. So. Um, there might be something to it, all right, and we'll have a little look at that and talk through that in terms of what it is and actually how it could help you. It'll just be the short version tonight. I've got a much longer version of the presentation, but we're just going to do a short intro version of it to give you some food for thought. And also because I just want to have a look at markets, because of course we live in interesting times. So what we're going to talk about, a gentleman by the name of John Boyd, and we'll talk about how he reshaped strategy and tactics, beginning in the American Air Force, and then basically how that filtered out into basically just into business and then just into life itself. And that is his contribution is known as the OODA Loop, and of course, most importantly, is like, well, that's great, but how do I use it to improve my trading? And I said, we're just going to do the short version of it, so I won't go into as deep as I would normally. But hopefully, as I said, I'll give you a bit of food for thought to think about how you operate. So part of this has come from, I wrote an article years ago now for Traders Magazine, sort of talking about what traders can learn from battle managers, from what I brought from my career in the Royal Air Force, and what were the applicable skills that you could take across into being a trader, and what could other people learn from that? And one of those things was the OODA loop was kind of drummed into me to the extent that it becomes just your natural way of operating, and I think that helps me enormously, and maybe it'll help some of you as well. If you want to go even further to the start, this was a chap called. Here we go. You've got Paul on his hobby horse of military history and the RAF and stuff. So back in the Battle of Britain, the chap at the top left is a guy called Sailor Malan, who was a South African guy, who was a fighter leader and became like one of the best fighter leaders of the RAF in the Second World War. And he did very, very well in the Battle of Britain, and he wrote a book called The 10 Rules for Air Fighting, which became the sort of de facto sort of way of operating. And if you've ever seen the movie, The Battle of Britain, Robert Shaw plays him in that movie. Although he's not called that, he's just called Skipper. But there you go. So a little bit of. As I said, Paul on his hobby horse with his various background and history, etc. But all of that kind of leads us into, part of what the VTP is about, and a part of what all of us can take on board, namely that skill is a drill. All right, one of the veterans' edges, knowing that skill is a drill, knowing that confidence in whatever you're doing comes from being competent in that skill. And competence really just comes from skill. Skill really is a drill, and drill really is a process. You're following a process until the response becomes automatic. So, if you're a soldier, your drill is basically being able to strip your rifle down and put it back together in the dark, with your eyes closed and such, because it becomes, a process that, until response becomes automatic. Doctors, nurses in working in A&E being able to triage people, get cannulas into them. All right, they just do it so often until it basically the response becomes automatic. And in other performance environments, you'll find that, realizing that skill is a drill. But when it comes to trading, what I have seen and found, especially on kind of, let's say, the private retail side, is that, traders are taught tactics. They might be taught a tactic, but they're pretty much left on their own to figure everything else out. And, some people do, but a lot of people don't, because they've never really worked in those kind of performance environments. All right. And so they struggle a bit. Okay. They struggle a bit in either sort of, creating the kind of processes that help them, or being able to actually to follow them. And that's kind of one of the things where the VTP originally came from, was from a study done by a company called Accenture Analytics, who they are like they do performance work for traders, primarily more for like fund managers. They do a lot of work in they did a lot of work in London and Wall Street and elsewhere, and they did a study about 10 years or so ago about what made these program managers, fund managers, traders, interviewing guys and girls who were effectively running like $10 billion funds. All right, so not significant guys. And actually, what kept coming back was that the thing that set apart the really good fund managers, portfolio managers, traders was process discipline and self-awareness. It wasn't about having black edge or inside edge. It wasn't about having a technological edge in terms of, having better computers. It wasn't even a statistical edge in terms of, necessarily understanding your trading, etc. It came down to process, discipline, and self-awareness. These are the three things that kept setting apart the very, very best at the top of the kind of trading pyramid. And it just so happens that process, discipline, and self-awareness are very natural to veterans because it becomes part of your life in terms of having a process to follow. And if you've got a process to follow, it becomes easy to be disciplined. And then actually self-awareness comes from deep debriefs that basically force you to look in the mirror, confront yourself, and be the best version of yourself. So veterans are very good at that. But the thing is, I try to get across to everybody is that process, discipline, and self-awareness, they are, they're not God-given traits, okay? They are traits that can be learned. They are traits that can be learned and they can be worked on and they can be improved. And it doesn't matter of your background, right? Process, discipline, self-awareness, they can be embodied, they can be brought on board, they can be refined, and they can be improved, okay, for everybody. But as I said, much of the trading education world does not want to go into this because they see it's a bit dull, it's a bit boring. But I can assure you, this is the sort of stuff that starts sorting the wheat from the chaff. This is the sort of stuff that starts to basically allow you to survive long enough to acquire the skills to be able to prosper. And I've always been very keen on this and leveraging it. And so one element of it is the OODA loop itself. Part of it comes from, as my background there, is kind of building the bigger picture. Okay, just building the bigger picture that allows me to have the situational awareness to understand what's going on, then be able to sort of make a plan and execute it, and then debrief that plan and learn from it and improve so you're better the better next day. And that's a photo of a very, very young Paul. Controlling an air war for Phil the Greek, the Duke of Edinburgh. That was a long time. In fact, that was about 30 years ago and stuff. But anyway, that was part of the job. Okay, the OODA loop, got sort of kind of drummed into me until it became an automatic response for myself. And I think traders could help themselves an awful lot by learning it and starting to embodying it. So for us to be able to do that, we need to start with a chap called John Boyd. Okay, so John Boyd was an American fighter pilot, and his nickname was 42nd Boyd. And the reason it was 42nd Boyd was that in like dogfights, he would basically he would have his enemy start out from behind him, and then within 40 seconds, he would have effectively turned the tables and killed the other guy. And part of that was his thinking, and really he developed like new tactics and theories for air combat and military strategy. And one of them was creating the OODA Loop decision-making framework, which came out of being able to win air-to-air dogfights. But the thing is, as that developed, it became fundamental in both modern tactical and strategic planning across multiple domains. And I'd say it reshaped the United States Air Force and all of like kind of NATO air forces and even air power to this day. And traders, we can learn and improve our performance by understanding and utilizing the OODA loop in our decision making. So Boyd basically boiled it all down to his life's work was focused on this personal aim: how do individuals and organizations win in an uncertain environment? And that uncertain environment can be like a fast three-dimensional, dogfight, an air war, Or it could be you as an individual, operating in an uncertain environment as a trader in financial markets. You hear me banging on about it constantly. There's really no certainty in trading, and it is actually about your ability to be comfortable operating in an uncertain environment. That is what will help you as a trader, and it's why you hear me just banging on like a broken record about managing risk day after day. Okay, because it's one of the ways you have to operate to be able to win in an uncertain environment. And Boyd's solution to this was he who can handle the quickest rate of change survives. Okay, he who can handle the quickest rate of change. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a faster brain than the guy next to you. Okay, it probably doesn't do you any harm, but you don't need to. It is more about a framework for thinking and decision making that helps you adapt. Okay, helps you adapt to the rate of change, faster than the other person on the other side of your trade in your particular case, and we'll look at that more in depth now. So, at its most basic element, he created a thing called the OODA Loop, all right, which was to basically, as I said, to help fighter pilots win uncertain, three-dimensional, fast, dynamic environments, and is still applicable to traders. And the OODA Loop stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, Act, and it is a loop. First point is observation, gathering information about the situation, whether that be, whether that be a rugby match or an air war or a board presentation or trading the markets. Second part, once you've observed what's going on, then you move on to the second part, which is orientation. Okay, orienting yourself, analyzing and interpreting the data so you're in a position to understand the overall context. Because once you understand the context, well, then you go on to the third part, decide. Okay, you make a decision based upon your analysis. And then the fourth part of that is act. Okay, once you've decided what you're going to do, you need to act. Okay, you need to implement the chosen course of action. But that's, as I said, it is a loop, because once you've implemented the chosen course of action, well, you want to be able to observe that. You want to step back. You want to observe that, so you can get into this loop, and you can adapt to the rate of change faster than either your opposition, or in this case, maybe the market, or the other people operating in markets. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But ultimately, the simple element, OODA Loop: observe, orient, decide, act. And that's, it is simple, all right, and yet extremely effective once you start to get into a habit of thinking like this, to the extent that you just do it naturally, which, like anything, it takes a bit of time. So, for those of you who have read Steve Ward's book Bulletproof Trader, even he sort of touches upon the OODA Loop. Okay, he doesn't really want to go into it too much, but I will, because I've lived it and I've worked it and I understand it. He calls it like the trader's performance environment. Okay, so the trader is in the middle of the OODA Loop: observe, orient, decide, act. But as part of that, okay, you as part of the observe and part of the orientation, which we'll talk about, you've got all these elements that sort of kind of flow into your decision making. So on the left, you'll have your internal elements. So that will be your attitude towards risk, your attitude towards uncertainty, novelty, consequences, your emotional control, and your results focus. You then also have, external drivers, okay, things like what's going on in the world, what's going on in markets, what's going on in the institution or the desk or the team you're working at. If you're trading as for an organization, you're also your physical environment, okay, as well, right? Does it help or hinder you? And then on the other side of the ledger, you have, the process that you follow, your own personality, your psychological framework, your actual physiological state. So even though we're looking just at OODA, Observe, Orient, Decide, Act, there are lots of things that start to sort of filter into this, especially in terms of the observation and the orientation. That becomes your first elements. And you hear me say this all the time. Men in particular think they can trade in a silo, that that they operate as a trader, and whatever's going on in the rest of their life, has no impact upon their trading decisions. And actually, it's rubbish. All right, and just even a look at this slide, just even thinking about the internal and external factors, okay, that all play into who you are, okay, and all play into even how you observe, orient, decide, and act. Okay, as a trader, even understanding if you have a process, what is your personality like? What's your psychological framework like? Do you have the resilience for it, or physiological states? Are you actually in a good physical place to be able to trade, or are you beaten up by the last couple of weeks of tariff shenanigans, for example? So yeah, so if you've ever read Bulletproof Trader, Steve mentioned this, but he doesn't really explain too much about it, doesn't go into it. He and I have spoken about it, etc. And I realised it's one of the bases of our friendship is about understanding this and using this, and it is, as I said, a useful framework. So let's take a little bit more of a look about what it means and actually how we can use it as a trade and what it actually means for us. So when we look at the OODA Loop for trade, let's start with observation. Okay, so observe. What's interesting is that observe is about have you had sufficient screen time in terms of that session, but also generally in your trading life. What market observations are you are leaping off the chart at you? Is that market, is it rising, is it falling, is it trending, is it consolidating, is it transitioning? What is the volatility that we see there, okay, in terms of observe? The thing about observation is that, and the important thing is that this is about you being open. Okay, this is about you being curious. This is not about you having any judgment. All right, this is not about bringing those kind of internal, external factors we looked at in the previous sheet. This is about you just being open, being curious, no judgment, just being open to the flow of market information. This is you just literally almost sitting in front of your charts, in front of your trading platform, just literally being observing what's going on. Just literally observing, no judgment, open to flow of market information, operating in the now moment opportunity flow, which is, like trading in the zone, putting you into the zone by doing this. And as you hear me saying, letting the market communicate to you. You hear me say it all the time. The market is always communicating to you, okay? It is your job to learn its language. And one of the ways you do learn its language is that you have sufficient screen time just observing what's going on. You're not trying to do anything. You're not trying to form a bias or anything like that. This is just you observing. What is the market doing, okay? And, your question you've got to ask yourself, do you genuinely do that? Do you genuinely do that observation? Or is it something you skip through because you just want to get to the trade? You just want to get to the to putting your trade on, okay? Give that some thought. What observation is about, being open, being curious, no judgment, just open, just being open to the flow of market information that's coming your way. And so once we've done that, we're moving towards orientation. Okay. And as it says there, orientation is we've been observing what's going on, and then it's about building the picture. Have I understood the overall context? Do I genuinely know if we are clearly in a risk on or a risk off environment? Have I identified any biases? Can I align myself with what the market wants, right? Which sounds very simple, but lots of people struggle with that. Lots of people, can I align myself with what the market wants? And the reason is, as we go back to that performance environment, is lots of people are projecting onto the market what they want. Okay, they want, I don't know, go long and make money, etc. They're projecting what they want. And that's one of the reasons about the observe element is about just being open, all right, being curious, no judgment. Can I align myself with what the market actually wants? But also, how will I know that I'm wrong? Okay, what would I need to see on my charts to know that my bias, my orientation is wrong? What would I need to see? And the interesting thing about this, the kind of space between orientation and decide, between orientation and deciding is where what they call the ace factor comes into play. So the ace factor is about air-to-air combat. But really, it is all about the role of situational awareness, your ability to understand what is going on around you. So the best fighter pilots have an amazing ability to build 3D pictures in their head, okay? Even when they're upside down and under 9G, and turning and burning and someone shooting at them. Their ability to understand where everybody is, on the in the air battle is an unbelievable skill. If you look at sports players, whether it be football, rugby, golf, whatever, but maybe sort of more team games, football and rugby is that, you'll just see there are some people you've either played with them or you've watched them, they just know where everybody is on the pitch, all right? They don't even need to look up before they make the pass because they know where everybody is. That situational awareness. And for traders, it is about understanding the context, understanding the environment, understanding the situational awareness. You won't have it every moment of every day, but if you're always striving towards building the picture and striving towards orienting yourself, okay, striving to orient yourself to understand the overall context and understand the overall risk on, risk off, that can have a huge impact in helping you orient yourself correctly to align yourself with what the market wants. That's what we're looking to do in terms of orientation. There's the second part of it. So we've observed what's been going on. We are have orientated ourselves. Okay, we're orientate and deciding is all about moving from orientation towards creating a plan of attack. Am I a buyer? Am I a seller? Do I sit on my hands? Keeping it, enormously simple. Okay, is it time to engage? All right, the market. Is it time to press? Is kind of is about pushing the market in terms of pushing my position because we're in a good position. This might be the opportunity to add to our initial trade. Or is it time, having done our observation, done our orientation, is it time, like a brave Sir Robin, is it time to just run away bravely? Okay, because sometimes that is the best thing to do. Sometimes that is, the smartest and the most profitable thing to do. Okay, but of course, people don't necessarily want to do that because of all of those internal and external factors we looked at earlier, and the way they impact people's biases. Deciding is also about, well, what tactic is most suitable for the environment we find ourselves in. And a key element is, what proves me right? What do I need to see to confirm that my plan of attack is working? But equally, what do I need to see to convince me that my plan of attack is wrong? That I've just got it wrong. That will still happen. That will help. But the earliest ability to identify what proves me right and what proves me wrong can help me enormously. And what happens if I go tumbleweed is like a code word for losing situational awareness. It's when your brain just goes tilt. All right, when it's just too much going on, and invariably I've experienced it many times in my earlier life and stuff. There's just too much going on. You reach your limits of mental capacity, and you just lose it. Okay, what happens if I go tumbleweed understanding? And then flip side of that is also, what happens if the red mist descends? What happens if I go fangs out? What happens if I'm feeling a bit too excitable about this? The fangs, we go fangs out, because that in itself can lead to challenges and trouble as well. So these are all of the things. Okay, the questions you're asking yourself when you're in moving from orientation to decide is about creating a plan of attack. Okay, creating the plan of attack. And listen. The loop is within loops is within loops. This loop could be something that takes that you work through for days and months. Equally, you might pass through the OODA loop in moments. Okay, when you're sort of aggressive intraday trading, it's about understanding the kind of the context and the time space that you're operating in. And then finally, you are into the act part. Okay, And well, as for traders, this is about placing trades if we've decided to engage. Once again, just to understand, if I've placed my trade, what happens if I reach my capacity? Everything goes mad. What happens? Okay, what do I need to see? What do I need to do? What happens if the red mist descends? What happens if I go Winchester? Namely, you have over traded, okay, and you're hitting your VAR, you're hitting your risk management limits for the day. And the thing is, once again, is that all that data, okay, all that data that's coming into your action is about immediately filtering back into observation mode. As I said, it's a loop, all right? It's a loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. It is a loop that we are following, okay, that you are working your way through. Now, as you learn this kind of decision-making framework, yeah, it might be a bit slow, it might be a bit clunky, you might make mistakes, but like anything, the quicker you do it, the faster you become at it. And remember what Boyd said at the start. The ability to win in an uncertain environment is about the person who handles the rate of change the best. All right. So as with all these things, the more you practice and work at it, the swifter you can become. So yeah. So as I said, act is that is about you taking action. All right, having done your observation, having done your orientation, having decided what you're going to do and create a plan of attack. Well, then this is you acting. But then as you act, you go back into observation mode because you want to see. Is the plan of attack working? If it is, what do I see? If the plan of attack isn't working, well, what do I need to observe so that I'm in a position to reorientate myself to decide what I'm going to do to act upon it. And so, as I said, it becomes a loop that we work our way through. So yeah, as I said, it is you having been through it, your next level as observation is about debriefing the trade, right? Did I follow my plan of action? How did it play out? What did I need to learn from that trade? What will I do better going forward? And even that, with the next level in terms of your observation, that is still about being open, being curious, avoiding judgment, being open to the flow of market information, operating in the now moment, opportunity flow, all right, and letting the market communicate to you and recognizing that the market is always communicating. Okay. And then, as I said, you're back into the OODA loop. All right. You're observing, that trade. Well, how am I going to orient myself for the next one? What am I going to decide what to do? How am I going to, what's my act? How do I carry on through? And observing how that plays out. So, as I said, it becomes a positive reinforcing spiral, right? And once you start to understand it and work through it, it can help you. It can help you enormously, And if you do find yourself going tumbleweed, if you do find yourself losing, losing objectivity, just even being able to look up and identify where you are in the OODA loop, right, and putting yourself back into it, and can give you a little bit of framework, okay, a little bit of grounding when everything might be getting a little bit too much. So this is Boyd's original drawing of the OODA loop, okay. And yeah, as it says, that it's not a one-time process; it's cyclical. So in trading, you're constantly observing new information, you reorient yourself based on changing conditions, you make new decisions, and then you act. And it's that adaptability that is essential in any dynamic environment, but in particular, all right, with trading, okay. So all that stuff goes into observations, the unfolding circumstances, the outside information, whether it be external information, unfolding interaction with the environment, giving yourself that kind of bit of guidance and control. All of that feeds forward into orientating yourself, and so lots of these elements feed into that orientation that we talked about. And once you're in that, well, then you feed it forward, and you're deciding, okay, you're deciding, am I a buyer, am I a seller, am I doing nothing? And from that, what do I do? What action do I have to do? What do I act? Okay, if I decide to be a buyer, if I decide to be a seller, if I decide to sit in my hands, what action am I actually doing? Because that in itself, that taking that action is what brings the interaction with the environment, and that is just all feedback that comes back into your observe element of the OODA loop. Okay, so there are lots of people on LinkedIn and YouTube. You can find lots of good people about YouTube. There's also a podcast by a couple of ex Navy US Navy Tomcat pilots who are called No Way Out, who's about doing this, and it's quite interesting. The one thing I would say is that there's lots of people now kind of trying to intellectualize the OODA loop and trying to take it to sort of new levels of intellectual scrutiny, which is all well and good. And I appreciate that if you're someone who's like trying to sell, I don't know, if you're trying to sell training packages to corporates, that's probably what you want to see. But the reality is, if you're an intraday trader, okay, you just need to understand OODA loop, right? You just need to be able to cycle through it as quick as you can, constantly, and recognizing where you are, recognizing the loop that is a continuous loop, and working with what it's telling you and using that to help you get better in that moment as a trader. If you want to go into the intellectualizing of it, well, you can do that later, right? At the time, that's not going to help you that much. You just want to be able to recognize, where am I in my OODA loop? What do I need to do next? So here's a little bit of homework. This is the short version, okay? So kind of a little bit of homework, all right? Take a look at your present way of trading. Think about it honestly. Do you have a framework to help you win? Could you improve your trading performance using that, OODA loop? Observe in terms of, what is the market telling? What is the market genuinely telling? And you being open, okay, and curious and non-judgmental. Orientation, do you understand the overall context? All right. Do you really have a good grasp on the picture? And if you don't, well, then you need to go back to observe. If you don't, well, maybe your decision in terms of your plan of action might be to do nothing. All right. That might be it. But then, you act, whatever it is you're choosing to do, okay, based upon you going through the loop. What you want is always, as you hear me banging on about, is flawless execution of your plan, okay? And your plan, it can be nice and simple. You just need to be able to execute it. That's what we want to see. So maybe take a little bit of time to understand the OODA loop and actually how it can help you. And it also helps just give a little bit of framework, a little bit of reference points, okay, a little bit of something to work through. And as I said earlier, don't be surprised if it's a bit clunky to begin with. That's fine. It's more about understanding the loop itself, okay, and understanding what each part's telling you, and understand where you are in it. And recognize, you can have loops within loops. All right, once you start to get to a level of, unconscious competence at operating with OODA loops. All right. So, in conclusion, John Boyd really was like a legendary fighter pilot strategist. If you speak to anybody in the air warfare business, everybody knows about Boyd, because he developed new tactics and theories for air combat and overall military strategy. And with that, he created the OODA loop, right, decision-making framework, which has become fundamental in modern tactical and strategic planning across multiple domains. Okay, not just military; it's everywhere. And he was always trying to answer this question: how do individuals and organizations win in an uncertain environment? Okay, and he believed that those who could handle the quickest rate of change are the ones who will survive. And in trading, it is SAP. Okay, you survive long enough to acquire the skills to be able to prosper. So traders can learn and improve their performance using the OODA loop. Observe, okay, using market observations to orient it to, getting towards identifying your bias. All right, deciding, okay, creating a plan of action so you can act, so you can engage with the market. It's not a one-time situation. It is a continuous loop. And perhaps maybe, if you've seen this all, watch the recordings of it, maybe you could see how this could help your trading. And, is there a way you could build that into your present trading plan? So there you go. Some food for thought for you there, ladies and gentlemen. All right. So I appreciate that's quite full on, but I in the same way, last week's session, we looked at trading in bearish markets. I think this is also because of what we're going on at the moment, and people do get a little bit lost and get a little bit overwhelmed and intimidated. Having something like this that can actually help you in terms of just having a simple decision-making framework that you can work with and work within, and you can utilize to help you make better choices. I think, now more than ever, that's a useful skill to have.